Boa tarde a todas e todos que estão aqui conosco presencialmente, aqueles que estão nos acompanhando online e aqueles também que vão poder assistir esse vídeo posteriormente. Mas a vantagem de você que está aqui com a gente ou de quem está online é que vocês vão poder enviar perguntas pelo iea responde@usp.br. Então é por e-mail, no iearesponde@usp.br. E a gente traz a sua pergunta aqui para o professor Carnoy. É uma grande honra recebermos aqui o professor Martin Carnoy, que é da Universidade de Stanford. Ele dispensa que a gente leia a biografia, a extensa biografia, que vocês podem consultar acessando o site de Stanford, mas é uma grande honra poder tê-lo aqui conosco hoje presencialmente. O trabalho do professor na área de educação comparada é super importante, e eu sempre, né, gosto de ler, estou até com alguns dos artigos aqui, né, a fala dele hoje vai ser focada num dos artigos que vocês podem fazer download aí para quem está online, né, para poder identificar algumas perguntas. Então, sempre gosto, né, de ler as análises super profundas, porque com esse estudo comparativo a gente pode identificar mais rapidamente quais são nossas fortalezas e quais são as nossas deficiências e a gente conseguir avançar mais rapidamente. Né? Eu vejo que aí o nome, né, da coautora desse trabalho com o professor é a Érica Rodrigues, né, que fez pós-graduação lá com ele. E, mais uma vez, muitíssimo obrigado. Thank you very much for being here. O professor vai falar em inglês, né, porque ele também entende português, também fala português, mas obviamente se ele falar inglês ele vai conseguir falar mais rapidamente para a gente ter uma visão geral do trabalho, mas vocês aí que estão no online sempre tem, né, alguma ajuda aí para quem tiver dificuldade na tradução, você pode usar os recursos que existem hoje. Muitíssimo obrigado e a fala, vou ficar ali na plateia.
Esta apresentação tem um paper que já tem Rosalice e podemos publicado, o paper publicado. So this paper is a correlational paper. It's not a causal paper. Rather, and it also is a research which builds on a lot of Brazilian research. There's a lot of research in this area, and I'll explain to you how this is a bit different from the other research. So there's been, I will cite some of the studies, but unlike most Brazilian presentations, I won't spend too much time on the previous literature. So just believe me that there's been a lot done, because normally the Brazilian presentation is, here's my methodology and here's this. I won't waste your time with this. I'm sure it's the most boring part, so we'll skip that. Can you read this? It's pretty small, but in any case, I'm not sure I can read it. Well, I'll read it here. What? Well, you can read it there. Okay. Okay. So let me describe to you before starting to do an analysis that we're going to do in this study. I want to tell you the setting, the situation. The situation is that there have been large increases in test scores in Brazil and many more resources going to students than was 10 year. Well, this period that we're going to cover is 2007 to 17, but it's also true 2007 to 19, and then COVID occurs and then it continues. But so pre-COVID, there was this big increase in GDP per capita starting in the late 1990s, early 2000s. There was a decline in the inequality of income distribution, and the test scores of students in 5th and 9th grade, and even on NA, went up. didn't go up right away. NA didn't go up right away, but then started because many more people started to take NA. But starting in 2012, when really most people were taking NA, the test scores went up until about 2015, 2016, and then leveled off. But in 5th and 9th grade, there were very large increases, particularly in 5th grade, of test scores. So the average public school 5th grader in 2017 had a reading score that was almost one standard deviation higher in 2017 than in 2007. That's a big increase in 10 years. And this was in reading, and in math, it was a little bit less. It was about 0.7 standard deviations, but this is still big. And even in 9th grade, where the gains were smaller, about 0.6 in reading and 0.3 in math, there were significant increases. So then you also had a big increase in GDP per capita, and you had the declining inequality in income distribution. And by the way, all of this contributed to even as the net enrollment went way up in both 5th and 9th grade, particularly in 9th, and moved to almost universality, even in 9th grade. This suggested that a big change was taking place in education. Now, in addition to that, the population fell of school-age children, and class size decreased for school-age children. Class size decreasing means a big increase in spending per student. It's probably the biggest factor. There are two factors that affect spending in schooling: teacher salaries and class size. Okay, those two components determine your costs, pretty much. Particularly in 5th, 9th grade, that's what determines your costs. There are school buildings and things like that, but all of that is minor compared to these two factors. The smaller, when you start reducing class size, you really increase costs per student. And so these two factors both went down. So for example, primary enrollment declined by 17% in 10 years, and the student-teacher ratio fell from almost 26 to 20. That's a big decrease in class size. And in middle school, it fell from 19.4 to 15.7, also a big decrease. So we can see that between these educational, economic, and demographic changes, that at the end of the decade, the second decade of the 21st century, the kids were learning more, and they were much more than 10 years earlier, and that they were likely doing so because much more was spent on them during this period. Okay, so that's the situation. The second part of the situation is that the gains that occurred, which were very large, I told you almost standard deviation in reading in 5th grade and so forth, that these gains were, first of all, they took place across all socioeconomic groups, from top to bottom, and across all race groups and gender groups. So all of this all went up, but they didn't go up at the same rate. Okay, and the gains were higher for whites, for blancos and pardos, than they were for pretos, for example. And they were higher for students of higher social class than for lower social class. And this is quite disturbing because it means that inequalities increased during this period. So between these groups, which is not really consistent with the goals of the system. And in addition to unequal gains across these groups, the student performance gains varied. These are all gains. It's not levels. It's how much they increased their test scores. It varied a lot among states and municipalities. Okay, and the large variation in student test score increases at both the 5th and 9th grades. We showed that in an earlier paper, that this the variation grew over time. And students in the lowest quintile, I'll show you in a minute the graph, the lowest quintile of municipalities in 5th grade mathematics, for example, increased their test scores by only 0.015 standard deviations, whereas students in the highest gaining quintile of municipalities increased their test scores by 1.2 standard deviations annually. This is annually. So in 10 years, the top guys increased by a standard deviation 0.2, while the bottom increased only by 0.15 standard deviation. It's a huge difference, 10 times, almost 8 times the difference. And so this occurred also in the 9th grade. So here you can see the gains across 5th grade reading performance. These are increases: 5th grade math, 9th grade Portuguese, and 9th grade math. So you can see what happened here. And this is the difference between the bottom 20% of municipalities and the top 20%. And you can see this tremendous difference between those that made the lowest gains and those that made the highest gains. So you have this incredible variation across school districts. Municipality can be called a school district, even though by 9th grade you have in many states you have a lot of state schools and municipal schools. In the Brazilian system, although the state runs the schools, can run schools within a municipality, the conditions in the municipality are very, very important in determining even what state schools happens in state schools, not just municipal schools. So, okay, so here's another great table, if you can read it. Teresina, this is by the 20 largest municipalities in Brazil. And it shows the variation for 5th grade Portuguese and math and 9th grade Portuguese and math. So Teresina made these are annual gains. And Teresina made by far the largest annual gains in both 5th grade and 9th grade and in both subjects. Okay, people seem to know this as I've talked to people about it, but nobody seems to know why. Okay, so this would be pretty interesting because Piauí as a whole did not do that great. But Teresina, the capital, did do very well. So something happened in Teresina. It would be good to find out what. And then Fortaleza is usually doing pretty well. Yeah, it's in the top 5, as we know in Ceará. It's in the top 5 in each score. So I was interested in São Paulo because I met yesterday with Schneider in Recife, and so he was telling me that São Paulo made pretty big gains when he was Secretary of Education. I think he was twice. He told me, or earlier in the 2000s, and then later in 2019. So it is true that actually São Paulo does very well in the 5th grade. This is almost all municipal schools. Let's see in the state. in a state, 9th grade, not so great, not so well in middle school among the 20. But it's pretty interesting. What's interesting is how huge the variation is between the bottom people, like Campo Grande, which is consistently in the bottom, and the top ones, Fortaleza, Teresina, etc. Big variation, okay, in these large municipalities. So in this study, what we're going to try to do is to study something about what correlates with these gains. What are the important factors, mostly socio-demographic factors, some teacher factors, violence in the schools as reported by teachers and principals. This is all from the Prova Brazil questionnaire and other questionnaires of INEPI at municipal level. And so we try to see what the correlations are. Again, they're not causal, but they give you some idea of where to look in order to see what is going on, why are certain things happening. So we're going to look at this variation, and there's a lot of research, as I said, previous research in Brazil, and continues to be done, even about these municipalities, but it's usually done at the individual or school level. So most focus is on individual and school. Okay. Well, there are reasons to look at the individual and the school. My own sense is that schools in Brazil have relatively limited movement, limited power to make a lot of decisions. I guess some schools get to hire really can choose their teachers, but most schools don't get to choose their teachers. The teachers, whoever they can get, they end up getting in municipalities. So there's the better, it's the same in the United States, by the way. The richer municipalities get to choose their teachers, and the not such rich municipalities don't get much choice. But I mean, the schools don't get to choose their teachers. The curriculum decisions are made largely at the municipal level, not at the school level. So there are a bunch of decisions that most schools don't make. They can keep order in the school. That varies by school. That's important. And the instructional leadership can be very powerful at the school level. So there are reasons to look at schools, but municipalities are also important administratively, and also generally the conditions in a municipality in terms of distribution, etc., may be very important. How resources are distributed within the municipality, how teachers are distributed among schools, etc. The municipality makes those decisions, or the state makes those decisions within municipalities. So it's a good reason to study municipalities. The analysis basically says, okay, here are the conditions in each municipality, and how do those conditions relate to the gains scores? And these conditions can include socio-demographic, and I'll tell you some of the things we're interested in. We're interested in the social class of the municipality. We're interested in the racial composition of the municipality. We're interested in how the students are distributed across schools in municipality, how equal or unequal it is. So we have a distribution index by social class within the municipality. So in some municipalities, the kids are distributed very unequally, and in other municipalities more equally. So it's called basically school segregation, social class segregation index, and in many studies there's effect of that. We could have also run a racial distribution index. In another paper, one of our students has done that. It's very highly correlated with the social class distribution index. So putting both of them in the equation doesn't make sense. We also look at school variables. We look at violence variable. We look at, we control for the percentage of private schools over time, how that changes. We control for the percentage of students in state schools versus municipal schools at the 9th grade, and how that changes over time. And then we also have a control for the state. So all our results that I'll present to you are really within state, not across state. So all the results are within state. Okay, so we control for differences across states. So again, I would like to say that there's a lot of research on which of these variables is important in the Brazilian literature. There's studies of social class segregation. There are just lots of studies in Brazil about these factors. So it's easy to look at those and see. But most of them study very particular things, and very few of them sort of put everything into one model, which is what we did. So the first main finding of our study is that social class of the municipality is positively and highly significantly related to gain scores, to gains, not to the level. It is also related to the level, but it's also more important. So this is a terrible result for Brazil. The idea that lower class kids are making smaller gains than higher class kids in this 10-year period is a very bad result, because it means that the difference has increased between municipalities of low social class and municipalities of high social class. Not necessarily of individuals within municipality, that's another study, but it means that if you live in a low social class municipality, on average your scores are going to go up less than in a high social class study. So you say, well, that makes sense because high social class municipalities have more resources. And you're probably right. We're going to try to control for some of those things. It remains, even maybe it means we should have better variables for the resources available, but it's really disturbing to see this result. So that's one of the main findings. And by the way, the municipalities that had bigger gains in social class, that increased their social class more during this period because of the growth rate of the GDP, that also contributed to higher gains. So if your social class was also increasing, you had higher gains. Okay, so you could say, okay, maybe the lower social class municipalities have bigger social class gains than the lower class municipalities. We didn't study that, but the two factors together means that it's much better for a student in public school only, to be in a municipality which is of higher social class and gaining social class than to be in a low social class one that is not gaining social classes as quickly. This is true both at the 5th and 9th grade. It is also true controlling for a lot of other variables, including the increase in GDP per capita in this period. Okay, so none of this takes away the effect. And this is within state. So it isn't a between state effect, it's a within state effect. So this doesn't look so obvious, but you can see here, each one of these points is a municipality, and the y-axis is the gain in scores. So the gain goes from a few municipalities that actually lost, made negative gains, to a very few, to municipalities that made 100-point gains during this period. This is the actual gain, not standard deviation, but the gain. So these 100-point gains are very large. So most municipalities made somewhere between, like 15 points to 60 points. But if you're at a lower social class, the lower social class groups, you are much more likely to be at the lower end of those gain distribution. And it sort of flattens out among the top scoring. There's no relationship above a certain level. So it's in the very low social class municipalities up to about the middle that the thing is positive. So here are the actual socio-demographic variables that we use. This equation controls for a lot of other things. But if you look at this, you can see that it's the second variable that you look at. That so for a standard deviation of social class, you get about 0.6 standard deviations higher test score gain, which is pretty large. Standard deviations also of social class also pretty large. If we go back to this, you can see that it would be this between 0 and -1. So for that, going from the bottom to the I wouldn't say the middle of the distribution, but somewhere around the 70th percentile of the distribution, you get a very large increase in test scores due to just being in a higher social class municipality. And then the change also has a positive effect, quite large. Okay, I'll get to race in a second, don't pay attention. So I'll come back. Okay. So my first point is social class. Higher social class means larger gains. Okay. The second thing is that the higher the percent of pretos in the municipality, and remember this is controlling for social class, the higher the percent of pretos in the municipality, the lower the test score gain. Okay? The average percent of pretos in a municipality in Brazil is 11%. One standard deviation is 0.16%. Standard deviation is 0.5, 0.05%, 5%. So one standard deviation increase in a percentage of pretos from 0.11 to 0.16 results in this is weird. It's hard to interpret this. I should have those numbers, but it means that it's too complicated. I'm not going to figure out exactly how much it is, but it's sizable. So just know that it's consistently negative and very large in 5th grade. By the way, all the social class and race effects are much larger in the 5th grade than they are in the 9th grade. So, and one of the reasons is that there's actually smaller variation of test scores among 9th grade municipalities in 9th grade than in 5th grade. Smaller overall variation. But at this you can see that race is significant, and by the way, this includes a lot of other variables. So race remains significant even when you control for a lot of other stuff. And the same is what's true with social class. And if we made a quadratic out of race, it means that the effect eventually starts to decline, but a very high percentage Preto municipalities. Okay, but it does go like this. Okay, so the second point is that it turns out that about 1/2 of all the municipalities with the highest 20% of black students are in 3 states: Maranhão, Bahia, and Sergipe. Half of all these high Preto percent municipalities are in those 3 states. And they're all not good performing states on gains. Okay. Now, my lesson from this, right now, I can give you a preview of how I feel about this. It is that it's all fine and good to start running around the country and saying we should duplicate Sobral and Ceará everywhere we go. But it's much better to run around these 3 states and figure out why they're not becoming Ceará. It's been a while. It's been 1995 when the whole thing started in Ceará. And not much has happened in these other 3 states, in these 3 states. Now, why is that the case? And it doesn't seem to have, it doesn't matter which party is in power. It isn't, you know, PT is control of Bahia for a long time, and not much is happening there, okay? And Maranhão, we know why Maranhão doesn't move, but what is it going to take to change the politics of Maranhão so they begin to do something about education? Okay, we know that there are difficulties, but we should really focus, if we want to see where the problems are. You can't just take Ceará, which had very particular political conditions, and stick them in Maranhão, right, next door. Right? You can't just do that. It's a different place. For whatever reason, historically, it's a different place. So politics is everything in education. Everything. It's maybe, I know the people who work in education understand this all the time, but the people that don't actually work in education, they work on education, don't seem to understand this. Politics is everything. This is a very political, education is a very political issue for many reasons. Anyway, knowing this, it tells you right away that if you really want to raise the bottom, you've got to focus on certain states and certain kinds of municipalities, and these are these low social class, highly black municipalities that for some reason, and I can't tell you what the answer is, for some reason don't do as well as these other municipalities. Now, it might be resources. I think that part of it is resources. It's money. It's plain and simple, not as much money is being spent in those places. But there are other reasons as well. So I am happy to say that I can't explain all this, and it requires a lot more research. But this research tells you where to look, tells you what to be looking for, and try to explain certain things. So, so here is the curve for the proportion of pretos in the municipality. And here you can see how important the proportion of pretos is. It really is quite negative. So the proportion, the average, as you can see, is about 0.1, the average. And then there's some municipalities that are up to 33, 34% pretos. So what really is key is what happens between the very low percentage municipalities, which are mostly in the south of the country, and the the ones that are very high, or above, you know, 0.1, 0.15, what's going on in these, what's different about these municipalities? And remember, our coefficients are within state, even within state. Now this reflects both within and between states. Okay, but the results of the negative coefficient, which is large, is within states. So even within Bahia, within Maranhão, and within Sergipe, the higher the percentage of pretos, the lower is the gain scores of the students. Okay, so it's really an interesting issue why that's true. It is controlling for social class of the municipality, so it isn't that. Okay, so we also looked at teacher characteristics. So we included teacher characteristics in the whole equation, and we found actually some interesting results. So we're limited in what we can say about the teachers to what the NEPI surveys. So we have 5 variables that we constructed. I'll show you what they are. And we also tested, well, I'll show you. We also tested for violence. So I won't show you those results because they're not well, they are, there's one variable that is significant, but so here are the teacher variables, and what's really surprised me is the percentage of municipalities that have the average percent of teachers without university degree is in the 5th grade, I believe, is about over 30%. And even in the 9th grade is more than 20%. So on the average in Brazil, the municipality has, in the 5th grade, more than 30% of teachers without university degree, still. And the same is true, but a smaller percentage in the 9th grade, but still quite high, surprisingly high. So anyway, this variable is very significant. The higher this percentage in a municipality, the lower is the gain score. Controlling for social class, controlling for race, controlling for, I'll tell you in a minute, this dissimilarity index of segregation, controlling for all this stuff. And percent private schools, percent state schools, all controlled for. And this remains quite significant, more in the 5th grade than in the 9th grade. And the other thing that's interesting is that in the 5th grade, the percentage of teachers teaching in a single school has a positive effect. Okay, it's barely significant in Portuguese, but it's significant at the 5% level, I think. No, that's at the 5% level. This at the 0.01% level. So it's pretty significant. And then the rest of the variables are not really significant. And the interesting thing is that average teacher salary is significant in the 9th grade, but has the wrong. Yeah, has the right sign. So average teacher salary has a positive effect on the gain scores. Okay, a little small, but it's small effect. Okay, but it's still positive. The which one? Regularity of teaching index is you have to look it up on INEPI, but I think it's regularity of teaching. The what? I don't think it's that. I'm not sure it's that. It has some other meaning. You can look it up. It's called the. There are 5 indices. The other one. Yeah, we used 4 variables. percent. Teaching in one school. Positive effect. And only in 5th grade. Only in the primary school. But not in the 9th grade.
So it's like an index that the teachers made for the last 5 years.
Right, that's what it is. So it's their seniority in the school. Yeah, thank you. So, briefly discussing these results, to say again that higher social class students may do better than lower social class students. We didn't find any really significant results of school segregation, which is not expected. You would think the higher the school segregation, it would have a negative effect on gains, but we didn't find that. It really didn't have a significant effect. We were controlling for a lot of other things, so maybe that's the case. But in the US, this variable is usually significant and negative. The more the school segregation, the smaller the gains. It has a negative effect. School segregation has a negative effect on test score gains. Okay, the more segregated the students are in schools across the district. So we didn't find that. We do have this mystery about why controlling for social class, why a higher percentage of pretos in the district are having such a significant and very robust negative effect. We simply don't know. It could be a management issue, could be poor management, it could be something about the resources available in those municipalities that we're not measuring with our variables. It's possible. By the way, we thought violence would be an important explainer, and violence does have a negative effect as reported by principals, but not as reported by teachers. For teachers, I think it has a positive effect. But anyway, it's very strange. But there are two questions in the Prova Brazil. One series of questions given to teachers about violence, and one series of questions given to principals. It could be that the principals have a better picture or are more honest about the violence in the school, or we don't know. I'm not a great fan of asking people these kinds of questions because there's no incentive to report the truth. But I can just tell you that from our studies, we did get significant effect on the principals, a negative effect. In other words, the more violence the principals reported in the municipality, on the average in the municipality, the lower were the test score gains. Just controlling for all these other variables, which is what you would expect. But it doesn't do anything to the black coefficient. It doesn't reduce it at all, including that variable. Does not reduce it, which means that it's not correlated. It's not in any evident way correlated with the percentage of black students, which is what you would think, right? That black municipalities, more black municipalities have, the more the municipality has more higher percentage of students who are black, the more violence there would be in the municipality. I mean, that's a common view, but whether that's true or not, it doesn't affect. It doesn't seem to be correlated with the percentage of blacks, or doesn't affect even the social class variable. So doesn't seem to be correlated. Teachers that are what? Yes, we have information about the race of the teachers from the Censo Escolar. the censo escolar identifies the race of the teacher. Lots of missing data, as on students, by the way, but more on teachers that don't report their actual race. But a master's student last year, not last year, but the year before, did not this past year, but the year before, did a study looking at the relationship between whether the teacher was black and whether the student was black. And here is the result. It's really complicated. If you have a black, the more the percentage of black teachers in the municipality, what happens is that even though the test scores of both the white students and the black students go up on average, in those municipalities where there's a higher percentage of black students, the white student scores go up less than they go down relative to the black student scores. So it reduces the gap between white students and black students, but for a very perverse reason. It affects negatively both, but more white students than black students. Okay. Anyway, I can find this study. I can send it to you. So it's really quite depressing to realize that the municipalities, because the higher the percentage of black students in a municipality, on average, the lower the social class of the municipality. So they're getting a negative effect from lower social class. Then they get a second negative effect for the percentage of black students. So municipalities with high percentage of black students and low social class do the worst. Those two, just on those two variables. Okay, and so I think it's very important to figure out why. And finally, the bad news is that these socio-demographic characteristics have a huge effect on what happens in these municipalities. And by the way, this is not in control of the schools. This educational system does not control the socio-demographic conditions of a municipality. It is what it is. And the question is, why do these socio-demographic characteristics are so powerful in determining gains, which is really bad, not level. I just keep saying it's not. Everybody focuses on level. We know that these lower socioeconomic and black municipalities do worse on average, but that they're gaining less is very bad, because that means that inequalities are increasing over time. And however, the good news is that the schools can have a positive effect. It's not as big as these socio-demographic effects, but at least it's positive if you put more educated teachers, if they they don't teach in multiple schools, etc. If they do those two things, the scores are likely to go up more than in municipalities where the teachers don't have university degrees. So it isn't all bad news. Also, if you reduce violence, according to what the principals report as violence, you'll also have a positive effect. So there are things that can be done through the educational system that do have a positive effect. However, it is also true that these socio-demographic, these structural effects are very powerful. These social structural effects are very powerful in Brazil in shaping what happens to kids in those municipalities. Now, whether it should or not is another story, but it is. And then the question is, why is that happening? Is it a question of resources? Is it a question of management? Is it a question of not paying enough attention to what's going on at the bottom? In my own view, I believe that Brazil is not paying enough attention to realizing that these lower social class, high black districts really require many more resources than go to middle class districts. Not the same amount of resources, but many more, when in fact the opposite is true. Right now, those districts are getting less resources. I saw, there's a very good study of, in 1 year, of the distribution of spending among school districts in Brazil, done by INEP, I think. And that shows that lower social class districts get fewer resources per student than this public schools, than higher social class districts. So in Chile, they have increased by 60 to 70% the voucher of each kid who is poor. So now they're getting 70% more than a middle class student in terms of what goes to the school for each kid. So they can do that because of the voucher system. In the US, there are studies showing that more money going to low-income districts, it does increase test scores significantly and quite a lot. So the question is Brazil willing, if they want greater equality, they're going to have to put a lot more resources into these low-income, high black districts in order to get just equal gains, not equalizing gains, but just equal growth. That's what's happening now, and this is particularly true in primary school. Anyway, that's the story.
Teste. Agora foi. Temos perguntas aqui ou perguntas da... Se tiver perguntas na internet, a Cláudia vai trazer para a gente aqui. Mas podemos começar por aqui.
Professor, what I would like to ask is about the class size. It was in the whole of the country the decrease in the class size, and this is a positive effect because it's increase of the amount of investment spending in per student. Okay.
Actually, you raised a very interesting question, because it could be that the birth rates went down unevenly. So it could be that lower income municipalities did not reduce the number of students as much relative to teachers as the thing. Believe me, it's the first time I thought about it, what you just raised. And it's really important. It could be that one reason that Fundevi could be giving the same amount of overall money to this district and that district, but in fact what's happening over time is that the districts with higher social class kids, well, I mean higher in public schools, so it's sort of middle class kids, their class sizes could be falling much faster than the class sizes in the lower income districts. It could be, because right now in Brazil, I'm sure that lower social class families are not reducing their fertility rates as quickly as middle class families and higher educated families. So it could be that somehow the system doesn't adjust properly for this. I know they give money on a per student basis, but there's a lot of what they call inertia in this stuff. So teachers stay on. I remember being in Italy, in northern Italy, in the 1980s when the birth rates had really fallen to very low levels, and the teachers were still there, so the class sizes were 10 in primary school class sizes. There were 10 children per teacher, because the teachers weren't being fired. They couldn't be fired, so they stayed on, and the number of children just fell, and so there were just very few children per teacher. So this is something interesting. It might be the case, and that's one way that resources might have increased more in the higher social class municipalities than in the lower social class municipalities. Could be.
Perguntas? Okay. I'm curious to know. I don't even know how to ask this. Because you say we don't know why in Black municipalities even there is this lowest increase, right? I'm very eager to discuss like structural racism when you come to this point, and I'm really, I don't know, I'm curious to know your view on this, if you have thoughts about structural racism.
Well, we know that there is structural racism. We have lots of measures of it, but in this case, I think we have to know the mechanism. I think it's important to understand what that mechanism is. So we could, it's easy just to say, oh yeah, the system is racist. That's the reason. That it's not. I don't think that's enough. I think you have to say, oh, it's what happens is that somehow that the nature of the difficulties that Black kids have in schools is not admitted sufficiently to realize that you really have to provide them with a much larger amount of resources and much better trained teachers in order to overcome whatever that is. Okay, so we know that the strange thing in Brazil is that more than 50% of the population is Black, as defined by Black in the U.S. In the U.S. is only 10%. Here it's over 50%. So you think that race equalization policies, here everybody's supposed to vote, obligatory. You'd think that the Black population could basically force the government to allocate more resources to Black students. In the U.S., upper middle class has no problem exercising its political power to get more resources. Okay, so you think that would be, it's more explainable in the U.S. where you only have 10%. The largest Black population in the United States is in Mississippi, and that's 36%. 36%. Here, the largest Black population percentage-wise probably in Bahia, and it must be well over 60%. When you count paros and pretos, they should be able to elect people that give more resources to those municipalities with more Black students. And the question is, why doesn't that happen? That's what's interesting. If that's the reason, we have to go to those municipalities. I'm trying to get people to go there and actually look around and see what's happening in these and compare in the same state.
Just and these municipalities are in Bahia, Maranhão, and Sergipe.
50% of the high black municipalities are in 3 states. Yeah. But even within those states, what these results show is the more black the municipality, the worse it does. So then the question is, you can go within one state and look at the range of municipalities. Then you don't have to worry that you're in Paraná versus Bahia, different administration. So let's see what happens in these municipalities. And I think it would be pretty interesting. Go to these high black municipalities. Are they chaotic, or they just have fewer resources, or maybe they have the same resources, but with those same resources they can't recruit very good teachers to come there. There are many possibilities, but we should find out.
What can we do to find out? Could we do something together to find out?
Well, if it depends what we find out. If we
But to go there and find out, maybe you could join efforts to.
Yeah, I think we should do. Yeah, when I was at the University of Chicago, when I was a student, I did my dissertation about the returns to education in Mexico. Okay, so I thought that I was going to get my data from the census, and the census in those days was on cards. Has anybody ever seen those cards? No, it's like different. It's like Neanderthal. Anyway, each observation was on a card, and so you would punch in the typewriter and would make a card. So you punch in the data, and then be little holes in the card. Okay, and the computer would read these little holes, and each observation would come through on a card reader. Instead of a tape, you just run cards through the computer. Okay, and the cards had holes in them. And you typed them. And if you made a mistake, you had to find the mistake, where the mistake was on the card. It was really excruciating work. So anyway, the whole census of Mexico was on cards. So what I wanted them to do for me is to do a 1 in 1,000 sample, random, from the census, and give me those 1 in 1,000 cards and make a copy for me, and then I would go to the computer and I would start doing my regression analysis from the cards. The cards were like data, like you have stored on your computer now in some data file. So those cards were data, and but they said they would do it, and then they didn't do it. Okay, so I called my advisor from Mexico, and I said, I'd spent the whole previous summer gathering cost data on education. Nobody had ever figured out what the costs per student were in Mexico. So I went to the original books of each school, and I tried to do a sample of schools to see what they were spending. Anyway, so I spent 3 months. I was already very invested in this project. So I said, I can't get the cards. I said, but my father knows somebody with a factory in Puebla, and this guy is going to let me interview the workers in his factory. Would that be okay if I could get enough workers? It wouldn't be random, but I could get some idea of what. I would make a short questionnaire, 7, 8 questions, and I would fill it by hand and then type in the cards. And so that's what I did. I interviewed 4,000 workers in 3 cities. And it was great. It was great. And everybody laughed when I came back to the University of Chicago, because nobody had ever collected their own data. You always use secondary data, census data, whatever. And so nobody had ever really got out and actually seen the workers. Nobody had actually seen the factories or the places where people worked. And it was really interesting. I saw the things that I saw during those 4 months were unbelievable. I should have written a book about economic development in Mexico in the 1960s. That's what I should have written, because I saw incredible stuff. And I actually came up with a concept, which nobody pays attention to, but it's still used implicitly, and that is downward substitution. Well, downward substitution. What did I see? I went to this textile plant in Puebla, and I saw a worker, a young worker with 6 years of schooling, standing at a big loom. You know what a loom is? A loom is where they take the thread, and this big power machine takes the thread and makes it into cloth. So that's a loom. That's called LOOM. And next to him was a guy that was analfabeto, who had learned to do this, operate this machine, because he had a little loom at home originally and was doing it at home when they were. The old system of making cloth was that there was a wholesaler who went around to the different farmers. The women would be making the cloth, or the men would be making the cloth from. They would give them the thread by the pound, and they would. I'm sorry, they would give them the thread, and then the product they would weigh by the pound. You know what the workers in England used to do? They used to wet the cloth to make it weigh more, slightly wet it, and there were a lot of stuff like that. But so that's how this guy would know analfabeto. He had learned it, and the two men they were standing next to each other. One was 20 years old, 18 years old. The other guy was 60. They were both working on the same machine, completely different levels of education. It was generational. And so I said to myself, wow, what happens is if you keep increasing education, then people with more education start to replace people with less education. But what I should have figured out is that really within the same factory, their productivity is the same, because the machine determines the productivity, not the worker. So there's all this stuff that I learned. I spent 3 days in Monterrey interviewing. Monterrey had a completely different system of work. There were 2 monopolies that controlled the city, and you worked for one of those monopolies all your life. You couldn't shift from one monopoly to the other. So there was no competition. That you simply took whatever wage you could get. So they started with much higher wages, and they didn't go up very much over your lifetime. But you could get benefits, like getting a mortgage, a hipoteca. As a result, after 20 years of working, you could get it low. So I found out all about these different systems of work that took place in this one country. But I never wrote about it. And I even interviewed farmers out in the countryside, saw a lot of stuff. Anyway, having collected data myself, I really became a big advocate of going and looking at the stuff. Look at it. Doesn't mean that you give anecdotal evidence. I'm completely against these new kinds of 1-2 case studies that now has taken over, identity studies, interviews. I even saw an article about two gay partner teachers, 2 teachers, interviewed each other in great detail. They were partners in life. They were, I don't know if they were married to each other or partners, but they did an article that appeared in the Comparative Education Review about interviewing each other about what it's like to be a gay teacher, whatever, Chicago. To me, it's a little bit too much. But anyway, observational studies are super important. Going out and seeing what's going on in the place. And so I've done that ever since. And I feel frustrated because I don't know what's going on in these municipalities. I can't tell you.
I think that there's a census in Brazil of a census of education in Brazil that you could collect all the data about black students and social.
But I understood that he's using all of this, but what you want is to understand why things happen there.
I think the way to do things is to look at these larger relationships. And then the way I did it in Mexico, I understood everything about my data because I had collected. So I could tell when somebody was lying to me or I wouldn't say lying, but making up stuff. So I was interviewing a guy on a ejido, a communal farm, and he was completely drunk. He'd been all day in the fields drinking pulque. Pulque is from a cactus. It's a Mexican drink, like tequila. So they take a big thing and they go in the fields and they work and they drink. So he comes back, he's totally drunk. And I asked him, how many years of education do you have? He said, 10? I said, I don't think so. I said, he said 4? I didn't use his questionnaire. But the point is that when you get data from a secondary scores, you don't know anything about it. You have to really go through it and see where the missing data are, and you have to see, or these answers look, and you'll see, even on the PISA data, you'll see stuff that's completely crazy. And they keep using those data, and nobody seems to check what actually is in those data, what the students report. So, for example, in Russia, we were using the data on hours of math reported by the students, hours of math that they were exposed to. And about 15% of the answers were outside any possibility in the Russian system. There's no way you're going to get 2 hours of math a week in a school. It's just not possible. So if you don't look at the data, and say, well, what's reasonable about these data? So people don't do that. Gathering your own data, of course, you understand all the problems with the data. So I would say what I learned on that side is that you should examine the data very carefully before you use it, because there are many things in the data which are not very good. But in this case, what this tells you is something is out there. Something is out there that looks like it's real, and that is that higher social class students, higher social class municipalities are doing better in terms of how much they're gaining than lower social class municipalities. High black municipalities are doing worse, even when you control for social class, even within the same state. So it's an interesting question. Why is that? Why is that? The data says that. Is there an explanation for it? But to get the explanation, you must go there.
That's where I want to do collaboration, because you are raising lots of questions that maybe with our partners we could do these observations together with you.
That would be great.
That's an invitation to cooperate.
Yeah.
Thank you. So while you were analyzing this data, were there any variables that you thought, oh, if we only had like that information, or any variables that we think we should be measuring, or these surveys should be measuring and they are not, like to better explain this phenomena, like new variables that could be included in those surveys to help us understand this phenomena?
Well, I think that one of the big problems with these studies has always been that the school data are highly correlated with the social class data. Okay, so the distribution of teacher characteristics is not random across these municipalities, or across schools within municipalities. So that has always been a problem of the correlation. It's, I think, important to realize that even when you control for the social class and race of the municipality, that you still get a teacher effect. Okay, so, but this is probably an underestimate of the teacher effect, because if you could assign, how would we put it? If you could assign teachers randomly across municipalities, probably the effect of teachers might be larger. Because right now, you're controlling for part of the teacher effect with the social class. The better teachers are already in higher social class. Teachers in high social class municipalities, low block municipalities, there are many fewer teachers without university degree. So what you're saying here for this is that within state, taking out the social class effect, you're still getting an effect of the teachers without university degree. And it's overall, it's probably larger than this. But it's hard to do that without random assignment of some kind, or trying to figure out a way to get at random assignment. That's why people do studies using individual data of students, and then they control for teacher fixed effect. They do all kinds of stuff. But honestly, the best thing, the thing that we've tried to do, again, not with great success, is in states like Sao Paulo, you can follow the same students over time. And you can, therefore, from 5th to 9th grade, and you can actually do a better job of getting at teacher effects than this is. But I would say that if I could, to answer your question, if I could have, if I could do it, I would like INEPI to release the individual data so that I could follow students from the 5th to the 9th grade within municipality, within school. Well, we can't do within school, but within municipality, and to see, and then since we can identify the trouble is you can't, in the US, because we have the test scores from year to year, we can actually identify the student with the teacher in each year. And then you can really measure teacher effects. Teacher effects, in terms of characteristics of teachers, have not been great. It's been found that more experienced teachers have better gains with the students, but not much more. One reason is that there's very little variation of teacher education in the US. Here there would be more. So for example, we could probably, if we had year-to-year data on the students, we could, and we knew who their teacher was in each year, then we could at least say what the real effect of the teacher not having a university degree or not having a degree at least in the 5th to 9th grade, of not having a degree in that subject. Because by 5th to 9th grade, we also have teachers who have pedagogical degrees and teachers who have actual math and science, math degrees. Yeah, there are a lot of data I'd like to have, but it isn't really the data that are as important as the form of the data. Is right now, well, this is not bad. At least we have the gains by municipality, same municipality. We could do this by school too. Not every school takes the test every year, the Prova Brazil, but you can do it by schools. Some of the things we did with the black teachers, we did by school. The other thing we could do is that we can look at the 5th to 9th grade gains for various cohorts. So, for example, we could look at 2007 5th graders in a municipality and the 2011 9th graders. Then take the 2009 5th graders and look at the 2013 9th graders, etc. So we could get 4 or 5 cohorts across those years, and we could see the municipalities for middle school, for the segundo básico, fundamental 2, we could get gains just for middle school. And middle school is very important because there you have the state schools, the municipal schools, and you could look at municipalities that do better in those places, whether it's state schools or doing better. State schools, on average, the kids do better. It's a positive effect. We also, another explanation for some of this is that, by the way, I didn't tell you this, is that there's been a big movement toward private schools, particularly in 5th grade during this period, from 10 to 18% between 2000, the increase in percent of kids going to private school. And so we looked at this figure across municipalities to see if it had some effect on what was happening in these black districts. Was that perhaps they were not making as big gains because the white kids were moving to private schools, which would, assuming that the higher scoring kids are moving to private schools, it means that they leave the lower scoring white kids in those schools, and black kids too, moving to private schools. And so that reduces, but it didn't have a significant effect.
São 5 horas da tarde, então a gente vai encerrando por hoje e agradecendo mais uma vez pela sua presença aqui. É sempre uma honra tê-lo conosco. Muito obrigada. Uma salva de palmas para o nosso convidado.